Do you have a spongy brake pedal, or maybe less than ideal braking force? The pedal feels just a little bit light. Maybe you need to pump it up a little bit to get some real action. If any of those sound like your car, then you probably need to flush your brake fluid and bleed your lines. Now, since the process for doing both of those things is pretty much identical, and I need to do it on my friend's F10 5 Series, I thought I'd walk you through the process. Now, the thing about brake fluid, specifically .4 that we're using here, it's hygroscopic, which means that it absorbs moisture from the air. Now, this doesn't sound like a bad thing. Water is still an incompressible fluid, but the trouble is that water's boiling point is only 100 degrees Celsius compared to the .4's roughly 270. I should make it clear though that if you take your car to the track, as I did pretty recently, I highly recommend that you put high temperature .4 in instead of just the standard stuff you get from, say, Euro car parts. As I found out the hard way, even the new stuff will still possibly boil. And when it does boil, whether that's because it's full of water or it's just way too hot, it goes from an incompressible hydraulic fluid to a compressible gas. And that's a problem because your braking system is a hydraulic system that requires constant pressure in those lines to push on the pistons and push on the brake pads to slow you down. The same happens if you've just replaced a component like a brake line or a caliper. Air bubbles will be in that system, and air is also a very compressible gas, and therefore you're not going to have very good brake pressure until you bleed that system. And like I said, the process for both flushing, replacing the fluid, and bleeding any air bubbles is the same. So let's get into it. On this F10 5 Series, the process is pretty simple. You'll want to start by opening your bonnet with the catch in the driver's side footwell, just by the door jamb. And once the bonnet's up, remove the 3 plastic trim clips that are on the left-hand side of in our case, the driver's side engine bay, just by the windshield. Those clips will then let you take off the plastic trim panel, which just lifts up and out, and then you can remove that off to the side, and you will see your brake fluid reservoir. You'll want to unscrew that cap, but make sure you have some paper towels handy, as the little float that is the sensor for your brake fluid level will be drenched in brake fluid, and .4 is really nasty stuff. It's pretty toxic and will eat your paint in a heartbeat, so put those paper towels down so that you don't spill any of that fluid. Now, if you're just bleeding your brakes, then this is all you need to do for now, because you're gonna need to top that fluid up later. But if you do want to do a complete flush, which I do recommend, it does help quite a lot as I've found out, then what I would recommend is to use something like a turkey baster or a syringe, something that you can suck out the existing fluid that's in there. The one that I have is for a bicycle, like a mountain bike brake bleeding kit, so it works just fine, and suck out as much of the fluid as you can get. Then top it up with some brand new fresh, in our case .4, until it's pretty much up to the top. You wouldn't normally do this, but since we're going to be going to each wheel and drawing a load of this fluid through the lines, you want to keep it nice and high, as you definitely don't want the reservoir to run dry at any point, or you'll have to start the whole process again. Next is the dirty bit. You're going to need to jack up all 4 corners of the car at some point, but the general advice is to start with the wheel or the caliper that's furthest from either the master cylinder or the ABS pump, which doubles as your distribution block. Really, either of the rear wheels is fine, so we're starting back there. You want to jack the car up and remove all of your wheel bolts so that you can take your wheel off, and then it's a good idea to give the area around the bleed nipple a quick cleaning with some brake cleaner so that you don't contaminate any of your fluid that's coming in or out. You can then put the box end of your spanner, in this case it's an 11mm spanner you need, over the bleed nipple. Place your bleeder hose, in my case it's a one-man bleeder with a one-way ball valve in the tubing, which makes things even easier. Place that over the nipple so it's nice and secure, and then you can crack it loose to make sure that it is actually going to come free for you, And then if you've got two people, this is the easy way to do it. Lock off the valve so that no fluid will come out. Have the person who's sitting in the driver's seat pump up the brake pedal and hold it as firmly down as they can. Then you can open the bleed nipple and the pedal should travel towards the firewall down to the floor as the fluid flows out, and potentially any air bubbles if that's in there too. You can then, once the pedal is all the way to the floor, lock that bleeder off so that no fluid comes out, and then they can lift up their foot and pump it back down again. We did that process about 5 times for the first one, and then 3 to 4 times for each caliper after that. Once you're done with any given wheel, what you want to do is tighten the bleed nipple down properly, but with the tubing still attached so you don't accidentally leak fluid or introduce any air bubbles in the final moments. Then, once it is nice and tight, you can carefully remove your bleeder kit and your spanner, give it another quick wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol or some brake cleaner, or even just some soapy water, put your dust cap back on, then you can put your wheel back on. And I found that when putting wheels back on, especially the ones with bolts rather than studs, which I'd prefer studs, but hey, that's what they give us. You want to put the wheel on and put all of the bolts in and tighten them down as tight as you can with a standard ratchet. Once it is fully seated and they're relatively tight, you can start bringing the car back down and then use a torque wrench to tighten them up to full tightening torque, which is 120 Newton meters for these sorts of bolts in a star pattern. Once they're tight, you can then take the car all the way down and you should be good to go. Also, as a quick note, if you are doing this solo rather than with 2 people, the sort of one-man bleeder that I have does make this relatively easy. All you need to do is put the bleeder on the same way you would, but you just open the valve and leave it open, and then you go and pump the pedal, and because of the one-way ball valve in the tubing, any air or old fluid that comes out doesn't go back in again. And also, if you have an electronic handbrake, or actually a handbrake that is integrated into the same caliper like this F10 does, it's a good idea to take the handbrake off before you do any of the rear wheels so that you still have full travel and the fluid is still flowing well through those calipers. The fronts are the same process, just with the bleed nipple in a slightly different location, but you want to do the same thing. Also, remember to check your brake fluid level to make sure that it's not too low and that you're topping it up regularly as you bleed more fluid out of each corner. Now, if, like us, you're a little bit lazy and you don't fancy taking the front wheels off the car, then you can actually do it a slightly more sneaky way. If you turn your steering wheel all the way to full lock right, on the left-hand corner, you can relatively easily access the bleed nipple on that caliper without taking the wheel off or jacking the car up. That's what we did at the track day at Donington. It works relatively well. It's a bit more fiddly to try and get your hand in and work out where everything is, as you can't directly see it, but you can do that if you fancy, and then turn it full lock the other way to do the other wheel. And as a final step, check your reservoir to make sure that it's not too low. If it's not pretty much in the middle of that yellow basket, then you want to top it up until it's there. Then you can put the float in the center, the cap, back in, tighten it back down, put your trim plastic back in with your 3 clips, put your bonnet back down, and that's you done. So that's the process for flushing and bleeding your brakes. This guide technically applies to the F10 5 Series, but it's also a very similar process pretty much no matter what car you're doing. Sure, if you have rear drum brakes, it might be slightly different because the bleed nipple is on the back side of the hub, but generally speaking, it's still the same process, you still do the same thing, so I hope this guide is useful for you in a more general sense, and of course if you do happen to have an F10 5 Series, then it should be nice and accurate for you too. Now, if you want to see more videos like this one, then check out that subscribe button and the bell notification icon. There's also plenty of other videos on the end cards, including the guide on how to bleed my S4's brakes, if that's what you're interested in, and replace the pads as well. There's also a load of other guides. There's also some reviews, including for a brand new Renault Zoe. If you're interested in checking that out, feel free to do so, again, on the end cards. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I'll leave some links to some of the parts that I'm using in the description down below, like the bleeder kit, which is really handy to have. And otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, we'll see you on the next video.